There are two things that made humans evolutionarily advantageous throughout the entire history of the world. The first is the ability to throw things really well, very accurately, and very hard, so we could kill animals. The second is our ability to make fire on command. It enabled us to go into colder regions of the world, it enabled us to cook our food, and it enabled us to keep animals away at night. And the sun's starting to set, so we better get to it. Now, what is fire? Basically, fire is a reaction, a chemical reaction that's happening very quickly, and it generates a lot of heat and a lot of smoke in doing so. Now, the way that it does that is it takes all of the carbohydrates that are in whatever you're burning, and it adds oxygen to them, breaking off those hydrocarbons and making CO2 and H2O. That H2O is something that we'll touch on later. But that means the first component that you need is air, and the second component that you need is hydrocarbons. Now, specifically, the type of air that you need is oxygen, but it's only about 20% of our atmosphere, so we're gonna have to make do with that. The next thing that you're gonna need is heat, which, you need to get the reaction started, and the way that you do that is you add a spark. Everybody knows that part. The fourth part that not a lot of people acknowledge and not a lot of people talk about is containment. You need something to keep the heat from escaping the fire as it's being generated by the fire, because you need that heat to keep the reaction going. So there's three types of fuel that you're going to need for your fire. The first is tinder, and that's anything small, anything light that is flammable and has a high surface area to volume ratio. That means it's going to catch a spark very easily because it's very reactive, and in turn, it's going to catch a flame very easily. Now, one classic example of something that a lot of people bring to the woods is dryer lint, because it's lightweight, it packs easily, it's very flammable, and because of the nature of dryer lint, you can actually fill it with petroleum jelly, which is also flammable, and that'll pack down and be essentially a dual-use item. You can use the petroleum jelly for things like cuts, burns, and scrapes, while also using the assembly as a whole as a fire starter. Now, there are a lot of other things that people will bring out. As you guys probably know, you've seen me with my clipboard. I've always got some paper in there. Paper's very flammable, has a high surface area to volume ratio. You just crumple it up, put that in the middle of your fire, and that'll get it started. But one thing that a lot of people bring out to the woods, other than dryer lint, is twine, because twine is made of natural fibers, I believe hemp, which you can pull apart after you're done using it as rope, and then use those fibers for tinder instead. Finally, if you don't bring anything out to the woods, you can find a birch tree and pull paper birch bark off of the tree, and that will light incredibly well. It's filled with natural oils that are also flammable, but at the same time is very thin, very papery, even thinner than paper itself, more like tissue paper, which in turn catches very easily. The next type of fuel that you're going to need is kindling. Now, essentially, the way that we want to build this fire is we want to go from things that burn easily to things that don't burn easily. And the natural progression of that is you go from tinder to kindling to fuel. Now, there's a pretty broad definition as far as what kindling can mean, but essentially, it's something that's light enough that the tinder can catch it on fire, but heavy enough that it actually provides some thermal mass so that as the fire is heating up or heating the fuel up, it stays warm even if you pull the fire away from it. Now, for kindling, you're going to want it to be something dry, preferably. Now, this branch probably is not going to be the one to go for. Well, actually, maybe this one, because you want it to have that snap to it. That essentially means that it is a very dry stick. And we want to take all of the little limbs off this stick, because that's going to be our kindling. But this stick in and of itself is also going to be our kindling. And like I said, there's a broad definition for what kindling can actually mean, depending on what your tinder is. If it's something that does not catch easily, or something that doesn't transmit very much heat easily, then you're going to want smaller kindling, like these sticks. If it's something that has a little more thermal mass to it, like that birch bark or like the lint, you can go for something a little thicker like that. The final part of our list, after we've collected our tinder, after we've collected our kindling, we're gonna need some fuel. And that's gonna be pretty much anything that isn't kindling and isn't tinder, anything larger than either of those. Now, luckily, we had this tree fall in my backyard, so we're gonna be able to ethically source just about every piece of this fire. We have the fuel right here, these logs that I'm sitting on, but we have the kindling from what I just pulled off, and then the dryer lint already had. I should hope you guys do laundry as well. Now you're probably wondering, how much of each resource am I gonna need? I mean, you say I need tinder, you say I need kindling, you say I need fuel. How much of each? Well, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because it's gonna vary depending on your environment. Colder environments, you're gonna need a little more. Wetter environments, you're gonna need a little more. But specifically, in colder environments, you're going to need more fuel because you're gonna be burning it at a higher rate. You're gonna need more kindling because it's going to pull away a lot of that energy in the early stages of your fire before you have a good thermal mass base. And with wet environments, you're gonna need a lot more tinder and a lot more kindling to get the fuel, big logs, lit, because those big logs are gonna have a lot of water in them. Now, in an environment such as this, it's a hot summer day, it's about 80 degrees out, or at least it feels like 95, and we haven't had rain in about a week. So for this environment, I would say we're gonna want about 2 handfuls of tinder, 2 bunches, and as far as kindling, we're gonna want about 4 bundles, about that size, you know, both of your hands put together, gripping it. As far as logs go, in an environment like this, it really just depends on how long you want to keep your fire going. If you're trying to go all night, you're gonna need a lot of fuel, but if you're just trying to get something cooked, maybe get some water boiled, if you're in a survival situation, then you're not gonna need very much. Probably 2 or 3 logs, about maybe that big. And those you can chop up into kindling if need be. Gathering up all of the tinder, kindling, and fuel, we're gonna arrange it in a way that allows for the burning of each portion in the order that we described before. So what you'll see is down here in the middle, we have that dryer lint, as well as a bunch of pencil shavings that I made with a pencil sharpener. Well, not quite pencil shavings, but wood shavings that I made with a pencil sharpener. That is then followed up by some of this very light kindling, and then that graduates into a little bit thicker of kindling in this sort of teepee shape. Now, I chose this shape because the log cabin underneath, so they call it, is a good structure for allowing the fire to breathe, as well as providing good bones for you to lay all of the pieces of the fire onto. But then this teepee shape that I've sort of hobbled into the middle also allows for all of that heat that's generated in the middle of the log cabin to build up and warm and dry all of this other light material above it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take a ferrocerium rod and a little piece of steel, and we're gonna light our dryer lint. Okay, so off camera that didn't actually work all that well, but I still have this twine, like I spoke about earlier in the tinder section. And what I'm gonna do is bundle that twine up in all of this lint. And then we're gonna bunch it together to try and hopefully keep the spark contained. And we'll just give it a good light. And that we're gonna toss right in the middle of our fire. Now, go ahead and zoom out a little bit. Now I toss that right in the hearth so that what it'll do is get all of the other lint and wood shavings that I put in there burnt. But we want to take all that heat and make sure that it's not just blowing away. So we're going to put a bunch more kindling, very small kindling, on top of the hearth of the fire. And then we're going to apply some oxygen. Can anybody guess how we're going to do that? Now when you blow on the fire, you want to be very gentle with it because you don't want to snuff the fire out. It's still very young, it's still very early, and if you blow too hard, then you could end up blowing the fire out the same way you would a candle. But it seems I did just enough to get that perfectly lit. And now it seems like it has enough momentum behind it that I can start adding some more fuel on this open side and get it nice and roaring and bright. So now that your fire is ripping and roaring and you're making hot dogs and s'mores, keeping the wildlife away from your camp, there is one important thing that you need to be sure of, and that is at the end of the night, when your fire has burned out and you're done, you don't need any more heat, you don't need any more light, you need to be sure to put your fire out. Now I'm not going to be putting my fire out in this video because I still need to edit and record the rest of the video and get it posted, but when you're done with your fire, you need to be sure to spray it with water on the red part of the coals, the hot part of the coals, the still breathing part of the coals, and then stir it, and then water it again until there's no heat left. Now that's one of the important things is out west, where it's super dry all year round, there's a lot of times where you can put a fire out and completely bury the coals, and days later those coals will come back and start a forest fire. Nobody wants that. Be responsible, be safe, and stay warm.